Don't let anybody tell you that, it's corporations and businesses that create jobs.
agenttomasz.pl.
First of all, thanks for that presentation. So I hope you enjoy being in Poland. It's your second day, right?
Second full day. I landed from Iceland. I flew from Reykjavik to Copenhagen to Warsaw, and then drove to Łódź, and then started first thing the next morning.
You probably had no time to watch television, but as we all know, we are at the end of the latest season. There's a final episode coming in 3 days of the most watched, the best TV series of all time, which is Presidential Debates.
Ah, yes.
It's not on Sci-Fi Channel, although it should be.
It should be, yes.
We're here to talk about a book, to promote a book that talks and speaks about war and peace. And you have mentioned Donald Trump several times during your presentation, the main part of the presentation. You haven't mentioned Hillary Clinton, which sounds strange to me, because it is not only it's not Donald Trump against Ron Paul, it's Donald Trump against Hillary. The story is quite shaky.
I was not making a political point so much as picking a figure who's now quite well known internationally because of his outrageous statements, and highlighting the absurd economic fallacies that he spouts all the time about how the United States has been raped by China because they send us all these goods, and we're drained of money.
There's a lot of rape in this debates, right?
Yes, indeed. Rape seems to be a common theme, very puzzling.
Finally.
But as he said, the United States has been drained of money by China. They have all our money.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand that trade is about mutual benefit. If you send money someplace, you receive goods. Those people do something with that money, and they end up buying goods or services from you. But yes, I do think that Clinton is also dangerous. I think they're very interesting. They're two of the worst presidential candidates in my lifetime. And that's not just me speaking, that's most Americans. They are possibly the two most unpopular presidential candidates, certainly in my lifetime and maybe in the last 100 years or more. Both of them have very high negative ratings by the majority of voters. They're not the same voters. There's an overlap, like me, who rate both of them negatively, but it's a majority in both cases. And that's a very interesting, strange political experience. I consider both of them to be dangerous also in terms of war and peace. Hillary was behind the intervention in Libya. She supported the war in Iraq. We could go down a long list. She's a very aggressive approach and dangerous. In all frankness, I do consider Trump the more dangerous of the two. And the reason is he opens his mouth and makes decisions without any thought whatsoever. And he threatens people. I think he's erratic and unpredictable. And given all the issues about them, I consider him, from a foreign policy perspective, to be more dangerous and, frankly, more likely to start World War III or blow up the world. So I do consider him dangerous, but it's not because I think Hillary is wonderful. She's not the peace candidate. I just consider her to be less likely to do something completely crazy and lead to horrific consequences.
I had a feeling that she wants to start a war with Putin the next day. I mean, 2 days ago during the debate, she was like full straight on Putin. That sounded very dangerous at some point.
I think she's certainly very concerned about that. In all honesty, I also think that Putin is a great danger, primarily in the region here, to the Baltics, certainly to Ukraine, and also threats made against Poland as well. My view on the matter is that he should be treated with great care. He is dangerous. He is aggressive. He has shown he will invade other countries, as he has done with several others already, and annex territory from them. This is a bit of a surprise in the 21st century to see countries invading and annexing territory. And so I think he is a quantity to be considered extremely dangerous. I don't favor the United States being aggressive toward him. I don't think it's wise to poke him, if you will. But I also don't consider him to be friendly to peace at all. Mrs. Clinton is particularly disturbed toward him because Mr. Putin has done everything he can to get Donald Trump elected. Hacking the emails, they deny that the Kremlin was behind it, but really, I don't think anyone should believe that. And we don't know what other emails they're going to be dropping between now and the elections. That's one of the things that makes this such a unpredictable outcome. I would not say it's clear which one is going to win because we don't know what will happen between now and then. If emails come out that detail various kinds of corruption or pay-for-play scandals by Mrs. Clinton, who I do consider to be in fact corrupt, or more cases of sexual aggression by Trump, or who knows what. But Mr. Putin has done everything to get Trump elected, and Mrs. Clinton resents that tremendously. I don't think it would be grounds for war, but it does mean that she's pretty pissed off at him as a consequence.
My second question would be about something that's constantly in the air between the United States and the European Union, which is TTIP. What's your take on that? Because I must say, I'll start with that. I'm quite lost because basically when I see people demanding to stop the negotiation, to cut the negotiation, when I see who's marching against TTIP, I, without any reading, become more of a favor in that because I see the Che Guevara crowd protesting against it.
Yes. Well, it's an indication that one should think about it, quite certainly. I am not an expert on the features of it, and frankly, very few people who talk about it have any clue what's in it. But there are very good economists whom I do know who have read it in its entirety and have given it a cautious green light. So Simon Lester, others in the United States and others in Europe. And I think that their evaluation that this would, on balance, reduce barriers to trade, it's not perfect, but they think it would represent a diminution of obstacles to trade, is a good reason to support it. In my opinion, the best approach is unilateral free trade. It's the smartest, and I think it is a direction that the world should move in. That said, I do think that multilateral trade agreements have had a very positive impact since World War II. The General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, now the World Trade Organization, has led to a reduction in trade barriers and an increase in voluntary exchange across national borders, and that's a very, very good thing. It tends to make the world more peaceful and more prosperous and more free, so how could I object to that? It's never perfect. This is not unilateral, authentic, 100% free trade of the sort I would like, but it gets us closer to my ideal. And those people whom I respect as serious economists and free trade advocates who have read it have said there are parts we don't like, but we think on balance this is an improvement. One of the specters that critics raise, though I think is wrong, and that is the idea that it gives up sovereignty somehow, that sovereignty is lost. And that's not what the WTO or TTIP or these other trade agreements do. There's no loss of sovereignty. What these do, let's take the WTO in general, is they create treaties in which each state says we're bound to do X and Y. If another party goes to a court or an adjudicator and says, well, you violated the treaty, there is a process of examining the evidence and the arguments. It's adversarial, like a normal legal process, and a group of adjudicators or judges issue a judgment. And that's it. There's no World Trade Organization army that invades countries or bombs them or something like that. They just issue a piece of paper. And what the piece of paper says is the United States violated the treaty it signed by putting restrictions on the importation of French soft cheese, for example. And therefore, if the French government were to put a countervailing duty on the import of who knows what, American hard cheese, that would be consistent with the treaty relationship. I still think it would be foolish, but it would be consistent with the treaty. So that's all they do, is they issue a piece of paper. They can't enforce it. And so those fears about loss of sovereignty, I think, are misplaced. It's based on a misunderstanding of these multilateral agreements. So I don't fear them for those reasons. And in my opinion, that dispels a substantial part of the opposition is based on a misunderstanding of the nature of the multilateral organizations and the adjudication procedures that they establish.
When we get back to the candidates, both of them, Clinton and Trump, it looks like there is no conflict between them on it, because as Clinton used to say that it's the new gold standard, the TTIP is the new gold standard, when she says it's positive that I'm getting colder about it. Right now she's against it, and probably Donald Trump is also trying to paint it in quite negative colors. So they are both officially against
Yes.
TTIP today.
Yes.
Beginning of.
Well, I think in Trump's case, he's sincere because he's ignorant.
He talks
doesn't-
about making deals, right? He talks about
Yeah,
making
well,
deals.
whatever. He's ignorant. He doesn't care. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He just emotes. He just erupts. But whatever random thought passes through his brain is what comes out of his mouth. That's one of the reasons why I consider him dangerous on the international scene. A man who wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning to tweet insults to the Miss Universe from 20 years ago is someone I don't want near the nuclear codes. His temperament is dangerous. There's no thought that goes into whatever pops out of his mouth or whatever decision he makes. Mrs. Clinton, in this case, actually does listen to pretty smart people. And I think she's smarter than the dumb things that she has said in the last year about these matters. But she felt threatened by two features. One is the populist, ill-informed socialism of Senator Sanders that nearly unseated her in the Democratic Party, and she wanted to respond and outflank him by being almost as ignorant of trade as he is. And then the second thing is fear of losing traditional working class Democrats to Trump, playing the populist card. So she ended up using populist themes as well and repudiating things her husband had done and that she had supported in the past. As a matter of fact, I think that the Clinton administration, her husband's administration, was pretty good on trade matters. There are lots of things I would criticize them for, on trade, on foreign policy, and many
The
other
House and
things.
Senate was Republican at the
Yes,
time.
but he had the courage to stare down the most aggressive labor unions, so that was a very important thing for a Democratic president to do, and then to work with the Republican Congress. So I think he deserves credit for that. They also had, with a divided Congress, a much more restrained budgetary process. One of the things we have discovered in American politics is that divided government is better than unitary government. So when you have a Democratic president, a Republican Congress, or vice versa, you tend to get slower growth in spending, and it's less likely that you go to war, because they actually check each other and debate. When one party controls both branches, you get runaway spending and war, which is what the George W. Bush administration brought, along with a Republican Congress. So I tend to be more favorable to divided government on this score. And I think, although personally, not in my institutional capacity or my job, I have to be very careful there, but just me personally, I do like Gary Johnson. I'm going to vote for him, I'm pretty sure. I send him some of my own money. I don't think he's going to win, although there are some unusual scenarios where it could go to the House of Representatives if he carries Utah and New Hampshire, which is actually quite possible. But who knows? But if we ended up with Clinton and a Republican Congress. But I fear Trump plus Republican Congress, and I fear Clinton plus Democratic Congress. Those two, I think, are terrible for the future of both liberty and peace.
In my radio show, I used to tackle problems and issues that are not taken care of by the mainstream media, both Trump, Clinton, TTIP, whatever. It is on mainstream media. So I would like to ask you, what is the subject, in your own opinion, right now, that should be covered more intensely, but it's not covered?
Okay, something that isn't covered. There's a lot of coverage of the refugee crisis,
Exactly.
and a lot of coverage of trade, and a lot of coverage of the Syria conflict, and so on. Well, here's one that I think gets too little coverage compared to its significance, and that is the folly, the foolishness of the war on drugs. The war on drugs, which the American government has pushed very strongly, other governments have agreed to it, but sometimes with pressure from the U.S., has caused huge amount of human suffering and also political conflict. What funds the Taliban in Afghanistan? It's America's drug war. That's where they get all their money, which pays for weapons and fighters and is causing suffering throughout Afghanistan.
In Mexico.
Look at Mexico, look at Colombia, look at Guatemala, Honduras, the violence that is piled up there, and violence in the United States. Talk to sophisticated people, police chiefs and others, they say at least 2/3 of the violence in the United States, violent crime, is because of the war on drugs. When alcohol was made illegal in the United States, 1919, the murder rate went up every single year until it was legalized, and then fell for 11 consecutive years. Now, correlation and causation are not the same, but that's a very interesting pattern. And we saw rather similar things with the war on drugs. And actually, in the chapter of this book on peace, love, and liberty is a chapter by Professor Jeffrey Myron of Harvard University economics faculty on this question. And he points out very clearly prohibition, whether it's of alcohol or drugs, is a primary cause of violence and murder. That is a topic that I think deserves much more coverage. And it has foreign policy implications, it has domestic policy implications. Almost all of the wiretaps that are taking place in the United States of America, which are justified to protect us from terrorists, we're talking 90% of them are actually drug-related. And that, I think, is a topic that is undercovered, and it does have an impact on a whole range of topics, from domestic policy, policing, the justice system, and foreign policy, and many other things that cascade out of that.
But you know, somebody produces those microphones, somebody has that deal with the government to produce and redistribute and put these mics on the wall, whatever. There are people who are being paid a lot of money to fight with drug lords.
It's one of the reasons why it's been quite difficult to get rid of, because you have a drug industrial complex, I don't know how to put it, and we have had many cases in which the government, the DEA, spends taxpayer money to campaign against legalization efforts.
So we have drug lords advocating for war on drugs. So we have everyone, politicians advocating for it, police officers advocating for it, or else they
Actually,
lose
most
their
police
jobs.
officers do not.
No.
This is actually not the case. There are organizations such as LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, that is strongly against it. But normally they come out against it when they're retired, because they feel constrained when they're in uniform, they cannot speak. But there are sheriffs, there are police chiefs, normally the elected ones rather than appointed, who come out and speak openly. The appointed ones usually speak out against the drug war after they retire and say, look, let me just tell you my experience, you cannot stop this. And then also look at the enormous corruption that it has caused in the police forces. You take a policeman who's earning a good salary in that job and is told, look, you open the trunk of the car, just close the trunk and look the other way, and we will give you 5 times your annual salary right now. Okay? Some of them will say, now you're under arrest for bribery, but not all of them will. And it is very corrosive to law enforcement that many of them, particularly in the narcotics units, are really in the pay of the criminals. We need to, unfortunately, learn the lesson again. I'll mention one last thing about that. When I was in Afghanistan a couple of years ago, I met with members of the Afghan Senate. And these are very honorable people. They're elected from their constituencies. These are people who had been held at gunpoint and captured by Taliban and during the Civil War and so on. One was a medical doctor who was punished by Taliban for delivering babies because he would see a woman naked. So that's a terrible thing as he was delivering a child. And the other was an airline pilot. And they said, we understand we need to legalize drugs. This is what funds the Taliban. We would like for Afghanistan to at least get the legal exemption to produce opium for the legal market, because there is a legal market for opium. It's used in pain control and hospitals, and a lot of it is grown in Switzerland. Why can't we grow it in Afghanistan for the legal market? You'd eliminate the violent crime. The farmers would get 3 or 4 times what they're being paid now without the fear of being bombed and so on. You would wipe out the profits to the Taliban and all the drug warlords and so on, and we could make this a peaceful country. It's a very good idea. They said every time we go and talk to the NATO, European Union, American ambassador, all these figures, they say this conversation is over.
I'm sorry to say that, but I must repeat what they said, because we have to finish our conversation. But at least speaking about prohibition, we can drink to end the war on drugs. Cheers.
Thank you.